I'm excited. I'm not ever the guest.
It's an interesting thing to be in the hot seat, isn't it, Katie Kempner?
Yes, it is. I think I might like it. Well, I'll tell you when we're done.
Okay. All right, I'll try to be kind. And you be kind with me, too, because you were so illustrious. I'm thrilled to have you. Katie, where are you? Because it looks like you're in a hotel room.
I certainly am. I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. My husband had a big meeting and bribed me to come with him by promising me a week in Savannah, which is not far from here. So I'm very excited.
Oh, so thank you for taking time from the road. Thank you for being on the podcast overall. It's really cool. I know we can work from anywhere, but you were very kind to be spontaneous and interrupt your road trip for me. Thank you. You know, my goal is to offer the insider scoop with executives about media, marketing, and advertising, and to offer the human side of those executives. But I get to know my guests a little bit better. And what I found out about you is pretty interesting. I've only ever seen you on Zoom for the past year and a half that I've known you. But I discovered that you have heterochromia, which is kind of cool.
I do have that. Okay. Yes, I do. And you can't really tell on Zoom, but my eyes are basically blue, but my one eye is like a third or maybe a little more brown. When I say a third, my sister for years, my younger sister Mari, used to try to convince me that the brown was growing. And it was very upsetting to me. But it stayed steady. No.
And you said, don't it make my brown eyes blue?
Or the other way around. You know?
You're 11 in 1,000 people have that. So I did my homework on you, Katie Kempner. Now, the other thing I learned is that you were also an actor with the unique credit of being the very first person you see in the opening scene of the movie Scam.
This is true. And I not only was the first person, but I was smoking a cigarette, and they did so many takes. Afterwards, the director said, you know, you are going to be a star. I can tell. And which, of course, did not happen. But one funny thing about that is that I have this great group of friends, and they were going to go back to somebody's house. But somehow the movie Scam came on, and they saw me, and they were like, oh, my God, that's Katie. And they told me they watched the whole movie waiting for me again. But, you know,
I think it got a few Rotten Tomatoes other than your first scene. That's pretty funny. So we have a couple things in common. And my little eclectic acting background included things like being an extra in a Huey Lewis video, The Heart of Rock and Roll, in the smoke-filled environment. And we shot for like 10 hours just dancing around. So I know from being around fake smoke, but still, you never get it like out of your nose for days, right?
Right. So, but that's a cool one, Evie. I'm impressed. I guess when I was in 9th grade, I was in a even dodgier movie, which has somewhat of a following because it's so bizarre, called The Class of Newcomb High. I was an extra, but I was cast as one of the high school students. But I would have had to miss a lot of school and wear a bikini. And my parents were like, no, this is not happening. And I said, you know, you're ruining my career. This is going to be my big break. So maybe that would have been my big break.
Newcomb High.
I was in a couple of scenes as an extra, just running, screaming, because the high school is being taken over by radioactive zombies or something like that. But you were just supposed to run in a scared fashion.
Yeah. Direction. Run in a scared fashion. This is why I love you a little bit. But back to business. I want to get to the who, the what, and the why you are now, and why I wanted you as a guest on Insider Interviews, aside from just being now my forever friend. It's a result of Newcomb High and Huey Lewis. Hey, it's E.B. Moss, and this is episode 38 of Insider Interviews, where you get the insider scoop about the business of media marketing and advertising. I'm sure you could tell from the first 5 minutes of this episode that I had a lot of fun chatting with Katie Kempner, partly because she's been around the mic before. Katie also knows her way around communications. She is the founder of Kempner Communications, but she hosts Perspectives, which is a series of conversations with tons of amazing women. She's interviewed Ariana Huffington, Joan Jett, Rachel Ray. Prior to Kempner, she was Chief Communications Officer for CP+B and also joined parent company MDC as Senior Vice President of Corporate Comm there before she went back to CP+B. Got it? Well, it doesn't matter. She just is really good at what she does. And by the way, is a very proud mom and lives in Miami Beach with her husband and her 2 dogs. And I share that because you can tell we're on a personal basis now. Here's Katie Kempner. So, Katie Kempner, I am so happy to see you. And this is episode 38 of Insider Interviews. I know. Now, that might be minor in comparison to the hundreds of people that you've interviewed. So we have a little bit of that commonality. You're also a podcaster, but you have a very illustrious background in corporate communications. So you want to take us through the path?
Sure. And also maybe illustrious is a strong word, but I appreciate it. So I guess we could start with acting because I graduated from University of Miami, where actually they were doing a lot of TV shows in Miami at the time. And I almost became an MTV VJ, but then they told me in the end that I didn't know enough about music. So I didn't know what to do. And my parents said, well, you're going to have to find something to do or you need to come home. So I got a job at a staffing company that was for graphic designers. I guess I'm dating myself, but hey, it was in 1996. And one of my clients was Crispin and Porter. And I met Anna Boguski, who was Alex Boguski's wife, and we became quite friendly. And she said, well, I'm leaving to have a baby, Alex Boguski's baby, and why don't you take my job? So I said, well, I don't know anything about advertising, but I didn't know anything about the temp industry either. And I, kind of good at faking it from my theater days. So I went over to Crispin and Porter, which was 30 people. And I loved it in there. I loved everything about it. The people seemed so cool. So I was hired to do new business. They had started to already have a good reputation. They did beautiful work, but it was still pretty localized. They were in Miami. And at that time, a lot of clients would say, well, we don't really want to go farther than Atlanta. It wasn't, like it is today where it doesn't really matter. So I said to Alex and to Chuck Porter, how about I also do PR and I'll try to get us into Southeast Ad Week, which doesn't even exist anymore. There were like regional ad weeks besides the national one. And they're like, okay, go do it. I mean, they were always very much about try anything you want to try. Yeah. So I said, okay, but I'm also going to need a new title. I want to be the communications director. So in the same vein, they're like, okay. So and this really does make me sound old. I went to the library to go through all the magazines, the mastheads, to see who I should reach out to, because I figured if I was going to be the head of communications, I should try to reach some other people too. And I am the product of hard work and being in the right place at the right time, because CP+B ended up exploding. I didn't know better, so I went to all sorts of press that probably would have laughed at me, but I didn't know, and everybody was great. And I had an amazing ride there for 18 years. We grew to 12 offices, 1,200 people, global offices. Wow. People that are listening that know the industry know that unfortunately CP+B has not had a great run in the past couple of years. But at that point, it was amazing. We were acquired by MDC Partners, and I became the head of communications for MDC Partners. At the same time, I had 2 jobs, and they moved from Toronto to the US and did both jobs for, I think, 5 or 6 years. Then I went back to CP+B, and then I had always really wanted my own firm, but like a lot of people, I was hesitant to start. I was divorced for a while, and I had 2 kids that I supported, and I was kind of afraid. But then Chuck Porter, my mentor and a friend who's been amazing to me throughout my career, said, you're getting a little old to start your own company. So said, if you're going to do it, you better do it. And this was the end of 2014. And he said, how about this? We won't replace you. We'll be your client. And that's how I started with CP+B,
Katie.
and then 72 and Sunny came on board. And that's how I started my firm. And we are a high-end consultancy in LA, Miami, and New York, and now Washington, D.C.
Amazing.
And we really do thought leadership. We do have advertising agencies, which is where we started, but we've branched out quite a bit, and it's been terrific.
I'm breathless. That's amazing. What a journey. And I love the fact that you trusted in yourself, and I think that sparks people trusting in you. And when you're visionaries like CP+B were and are, that's what a creative mind does. It's the trust and it's the let's try this. So kudos to you and to them. And I'm glad we have you now with Kempner Communications, because that's how I know you. Yippee.
Yes, that's how we got to know each other.
Yeah. So we've worked on some thought leadership content together, which I love. But now that you've been doing this for so many years with a lot of, I'll use the word illustrious again, because it is very apropos, clients and good success stories, I think you're the person to ask for sort of a primer. That book.
I'm never sure.
That book. I know. We'll call it a primer because it sounds prim.
English. It sounds English.
A primer on PR. So why don't we start really with the basics of what's the definition of these things we've heard, earned versus owned media, and then tell us how it's changed over the years with things like citizen journalism getting in the way.
So earned media are articles that are written about people or written about companies that are not paid for. And owned media is something that you purchase. I will say that owned media didn't really exist when I started. And when it first really came to be, it really seemed like it was very much of an ad. Now it's pretty seamless. I don't usually like it. I think I'm still of the mindset earned media is so much better. There are times, however, where it makes sense to do something that you're paying for. We work with a lot of our clients on creating their own media because it is easy to create your own media. I mean, you have to then get people to be interested in it, or then you're just talking to yourself. But there's so many avenues now to be creating your own thought leadership platforms. And if you really have something to say, it can be quite successful.
So that's interesting. So owned almost has a dual meaning where you're buying into someone else's media, you're paying them, but it could also refer to the media that you've created yourself. So insider interviews or perspectives, your podcast, those could be considered the media that we own if someone were sponsoring us. Yeah?
Yes. Well, with my podcast, which has also been a video series, it was my idea, but it isn't completely mine. I started initially with the support of Andrew Keller from CP+B. And then when I left,
another gift from CP+B.
Who's now had a huge career and is at Facebook. So Andrew was really, really supportive and gave me the opportunity to start this. And when I left, CP+B was terrific, and they said, you can have this property. But I do it now with Stillwell Partners, my good friend Matt Schechner and Lance Pilsendorf, and they own the Advertising Week franchises, among a bunch of other things. So I'm not really exactly on my own.
So it's on your own, or owned, or the other version of owned. Okay.
Or you find a terrific partner who sees your vision and shares it and is willing to help amplify it.
Yeah. Feel free to amplify me, Katie.
I will amplify you, Evie.
Otherwise, as they say, feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal should you want to tip me, because I am not sponsored. Well, that's the funny thing, is that it's very hard to ask to be sponsored. I'd so much rather create content as I do for other people, make it about them. I know I'm good at talking about myself, but it's hard for me to ask for the check and ask people to sponsor insider interviews. So when you started Perspectives, did you start it just as thought leadership from Kempner Communications and Katie Kempner? Was it a goal to eventually get either acquired or sponsored or monetize it?
So I started it when I was at CP+B, just to clarify that, but I didn't know what the goal was, and I didn't know what I wanted it to be, which is usually the case of how I do things. But the reason I started it was very clear. I think I mentioned I was a single mom for a bit, and I was always really stressed. I had a career that was very demanding, had to travel quite a bit, and I had 2 children that are always the focus for me, and a big reason of why I was working so hard. But because of the job that I had, I got to meet all these amazing women, really, really successful women, because I was with Chuck Porter or Alex or in situations a lot of other women might not have been in. And I thought, I'm so stressed. My friends are so stressed. I don't know the answers, but I know all these people that other people might know. What if I talk with them about how they balance their lives, which if you would like to talk about work-life balance, it's pretty interesting now how people feel about that. Now they don't seem to like it being phrased that way. But at the time, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a show where I talked to super successful women about how they balanced everything.
Well, it sounds like you were emblematic of that and came out the other end pretty well.
I think the thing is, in terms of work-life balance, I don't think anybody ever really gets it exactly right. I mean, at certain times you're doing one thing more, at other times something else more. But I did it.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I did a good job of it, but I did it. My kids are grown, so.
Well, I am going to pay tribute to one of your clients. You introduced me to Joe Jackman, who was in my previous episode, and he is an expert on transformation and embracing change. Yeah. And I'm thinking that you drank that Kool-Aid. I think that you have transformed yourself, and you have necessarily, to use his word, reinvented yourself pretty well. So I want to talk about, Katie, it's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Ditto.
So let's talk about the media world and how that sort of reinvented itself, and then, how PR has to navigate within that. We have subscription models and influencers, some of whom are bigger than TV stars, when I was growing up, and a lack of trust in news media. Everything's changed. Talk about the media world and then share how that impacts how you get that earned media anymore.
Yeah, that's a big one. So it used to be, when I started, that you trusted the media for the most part, that you knew that they were going to be fair and balanced. The New York Times, for example, who I still trust implicitly, would check everything with 2 sources, right down to when my second husband, the love of my life, and I, Rob, got married, we had our announcement in the New York Times, and they called our parents to double check everything was right. Yeah, wow. They fact checked us in the Sunday wedding section. No, but seriously, you could trust a different way than you can now. Now, like the country, unfortunately, the media is very divisive. You're getting one opinion or another. But in terms of also how I do my job, there's also a lot less journalists spread out over a lot more things to cover, which makes it much more challenging to get people's attention. Mm-hmm. In one way, the proliferation of media is fantastic because there's more places to go. But in the other way, it also means it's harder to get people's attention.
It's interesting that you say there are a lot fewer journalists. It seems like there are a lot fewer known journalists that are sort of venerated, and that we would go to, an Andy Wallenstein from Variety or a Frank Rich at the New York Times. But there are so many more journalists who have hung up their own shingle. I'm a journalist. I might write for the Continuum or have been the editor at Media Village. I'm not of that well-known ilk, but there are a lot more of me. Isn't that the case too?
There are, but let's take my clients. My clients come to me to do PR for them or communication strategies for them because usually they want more clients or they want to be seen more as an industry leader or business leader, and they want to be able to recruit the best talent. It's usually one of those buckets. So if you're thinking of those buckets, then the strategy is, where are we going to put you and your company that enough people are going to see it, or the exact right people? Because if there's one place that's going to reach 25 people, but those are exactly who they need to talk to, that might be more valuable than if they're reaching 250,000 people. But it depends. Right. It depends on what they're doing. So with that in mind, I know I sound like I digress, but I really don't, because with that in mind, then the question is, which journalist is going to speak to the audiences that my clients are trying to reach? So if you're speaking to the audience that my clients are trying to reach, then it's terrific for me. But if you're not, these smaller journalists, it's not as useful. So it really goes back to, like I said, who it is you're trying to reach.
Yeah, it's a through line with almost everything that we talk about in media marketing and advertising. There's quality over quantity. There are those who claim that scale is the only thing that counts. There is the audience, the targeted audience. You're dealing with a microcosm of all of that. So it's not a digression at all. It's really interesting that it applies in PR too. What else would you advise someone getting started in the world of PR these days? What do you need to know? Who do you need to know?
Well, knowing people is always terrific, but I think if you're getting started in PR, you have to have really good communication skills. You have to be a great writer and a great communicator, and you have to be careful. I get emails or see emails people send me with lots of typos or not well written because they probably just dashed it off. In fact, we just hired 2 new people, and I couldn't believe the ones that got to the second or third round. We asked them to either send a writing sample or put together writing samples, and they were chock full of typos and just not just typos, but sentences that weren't well written. Then you shouldn't be in communications, because communications is the art of communicating. So I think what you need to have first is good communication skills, which also you need to have a bit of them, but it's not, you sang to me before. It's not like singing. You can learn them, or you can practice them and hone them.
And, these days, there are so many kids who push back about having to take handwriting to knowing how to spell. Oh, well, there's spell check. Why would I ever need to handwrite anything? And I even know teachers who don't teach spelling anymore. So, and what about being savvy in all the different media channels that are out there now? Is there one that you have recently mastered and you love, or one that just everybody needs to know?
Do you mean as in the different channels of social media?
Well, that's just one bucket, but what about digital? What about podcasting, webinars, Zoom events?
So actually, your question brings up the type of anxiety for a lot of people, which is, how can I know everything?
Exactly.
Clients come and they say, well, I'm not on TikTok. I don't know what that is exactly, and I'm not on this and that. And I think you need to know the avenues that are going to be most useful to exactly who it is you're trying to reach. So perhaps podcasts are the way to go, or you should be creating webinars, which is something we do a lot for our clients. But I think it all boils down to figuring out why you're doing your communications, and then you can figure out where are the best places to put it based on who it is you're trying to reach. So I don't think you have to know everything and be good at everything. And I also feel that's just too overwhelming. But the thing is, when you have a company like mine, what I do is I don't try to know everything about everything, but I do try to work with people that know enough about certain things that I can bring them in when I need them, in addition to my full-time employees. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Surround yourself with those who know a little bit more about something else. Good. And so there's no one best place to start your thought leadership positioning. How do you advise your clients about how to really get their thought leadership out there and going?
Well, first of all, like I said, figuring out with your PR people, who are you trying to reach? And then the question is, what do you want to say to them? What are you experts in? I always say, let's figure out 3 things to really talk to that we can start. I think people get overwhelmed with, we got to put stuff here and it's got to be in front of a lot of people, and they don't really figure out what is it that we're going to say. You know, so identifying places where you can be an expert or where you can speak to challenges that your industry is having and solutions that you're either bringing to the table or helping to see how to solve these challenges make a lot of sense, and then figure out where it makes the most sense to put your thought leadership so that the people that you want to see it will see it.
And is it okay to have a ghostwriter to help you with that?
Yes, E.B. Moss at E.B. Moss. Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say we have amazing clients. So of course this never happens with our clients, but they don't even have, they're like, just write this. And I don't even care. I like to work with clients and figure out, well, what is it we're talking about? Like, what is it you want to say? We'll say it for you if you want. And we really have a mix. I mean, we have a lot of clients that like to write stuff themselves and then we sort of tweak them. And then we have some clients who prefer to share their thoughts and we build something out based on their thoughts. And I think that that's totally fine.
Good. So I have 2 more questions for you. First is that, remember I told you at the beginning of the show that I've known you for a while, but you shared some interesting things like your love of oysters in general. But I'm not sure if I interpreted this right. You wrote to me that you have a big heart rock collection, and I wasn't sure if you meant hard rock or heart rock. Because this is the funny overlap is that I was in a rock band with the former chairman of MDC where you used to work, Steve Farella. But I don't know if you meant hard rock or heart rock.
So first I have to say my love of oysters is of raw oysters.
Oh, okay.
Which my uncle, who is a very well-known gastroenterologist, says you could not pay him $1 million to eat one, but it is heart rocks. So rocks shaped like hearts. When I was 15 years old, in Wellfleet, Cape Cod, where I go every summer for my whole life, I found a rock shaped like a heart and it spoke to me. Oh. And since then, and I am 51 years old, I have collected heart rocks, either myself or my kids have found some. My friends have brought me them from different places. I have them from all over the world, and sometimes people give them to me as presents, not the real heart rocks. So I've added that to my collection too, but really my main collection are ones that nature has shaped like a heart.
Oh, well, on my credenza, I have a little collection of heart-shaped trays. So we're, again, 2 degrees of separation.
Katie. Again.
All right. So you tend to, and your perspectives, podcasts with a question to your guests that if they had one piece of advice that they've picked up along the way, what would it be that they would share? I'm putting you in the hot seat, Katie Kempner. What's your one piece of advice?
Well, I do have one piece of advice.
Okay.
I used to write for the Huffington Post, and I wrote a column about this. I think you should be your own best friend. And that can sound very hokey and silly, but the one person that you're going through life with is yourself, and you should support yourself. In every way possible, you should speak kindly to yourself the way you speak to friends. You should give yourself courage and just be good to yourself. And people really don't do that. I think especially women are very hard on themselves. And I don't mean live in some kind of la-la land where you're not being realistic, but be good to yourself and be your own best friend.
That is a little piece of heart that I love. Thank you. I love that. That's excellent. Katie Kempner, it was so great chatting with you. Almost one-on-one, but through a screen. One day we'll meet in person and I'll get to see your brown eye that's blue and vice versa.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for having me. It was fun to be a guest for a change.
Well, I hope you got some good insider scoop from this episode of Insider Interviews with me, E.B. Moss. If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/mossappeal. And I hope you'll follow Insider Interviews on social media and let me know if you have a question or a suggestion for a next stellar guest in media, marketing, and advertising. Speaking of stellar, my theme music was composed and performed by the incomparable Grammy-winning John Clayton. If I can help you with your company's podcast, please find me at mossappeal.com. Thanks again for listening.